This podcast is brought to you by Australia's LGBTQIA+ community media organisation, Joy. Keep Joy on air by becoming a member, a subscriber, or donate. Head to joy.org.au. Joy, a diverse sound for a diverse community.
This is another podcast of Worldwide Wave, the international LGBT news and current affairs show, every week on Australia's first LGBT radio station, Joy 94.9. Surfing the globe, bringing you news, views, and current affairs for the LGBT community. This is the Worldwide Wave.
Yes, it's Worldwide Wave, Joy's international news and current affairs show for and by the LGBTI community. We love taking around the globe one queer story at a time. I'm Matt, and we are all suitably sanitised in our COVID-safe Melbourne studios, where tonight I am joined on the panel of Worldwide Wave by Paul.
Good evening. An ever-shrinking number of countries across the world remain with laws that criminalise same-sex relations. Many of these laws come from the colonial era times where the likes of England and Portugal, you'd have to drop that in, didn't you, Matt? They came from England, had global empires where the empires have crumbled, the anti-sodomite laws often did not.
We're holding you English to account, Paul. Now, the southern African nation of Angola, which is actually of Portuguese descent, not English, has just updated its criminal code, and homosexuality is now legal. It was not a quick or a simple process, though the campaigners agree that it was worth fighting for. One organisation backing the change has been global rights organisation Human Rights Watch, and we spoke with their director of LGBT rights program, Graham Reid. Here's a taste of what's coming up tonight.
That because same-sex relations are outlawed, because of this language of vices against nature, it has effects in terms of discrimination within Angola. And certainly the main group within Angola, which is called IRIS, have regularly complained about discrimination in terms of access to health and access to education services.
Angola has had a checkered history with regards to homosexuality. There are many documented reports of homosexual and cross-dressing practices in local tribes. Colonisation by the Portuguese changed this, with Christian morality strongly condemning homosexuality. In February 2017, the Angolan Parliament approved a new penal code legalising consensual same-sex relations in private. But delays and politics meant the law did not come into effect until February this year. Graham Reid is the director of the LGBT rights program for Human Rights Watch. We asked Graham how this long-desired change came about.
I'm really interested to know about the change in legislation in Angola. They've recently decriminalised same sexual activities. So how did that change come about?
Well, this is a very interesting story and a very long story. And actually it goes back to 1886 when the colonial era penal code was first put in place. And as with many penal codes from the colonial period, it included a provision with vague wording against which outlawed vices against nature. And that had been widely interpreted in many settings, including in Angola, to mean same-sex activity or homosexuality. And so that law was always on the books from that time. Interestingly, there's no recorded cases of it ever being implemented. But Angola became independent in 1975. But shortly thereafter, there was a protracted civil war that only ended in 2002. And so that meant there was a long delay in revising the colonial era penal code. And that process only began in 2004, and it went on for 15 years until finally in 2019, the new Angolan penal code, the post-independence penal code, was approved by Parliament. And what that penal code did was to drop that provision of vices against nature. And it did something else. It also included a non-discrimination provision which outlawed discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity in the provision of employment, housing, or economic opportunities, with a potential jail term of up to 2 years for discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation.
So you said that this provision was never used, to your knowledge, in Angola. So what's the society attitude toward LGBTIQ people? What is it like for day-to-day life for members of the community in Angola?
Well, that's a very good question, because while I say that the law has not, to our knowledge, been implemented, and that's not actually that unusual. There are many instances in which similar laws are on the books and are not implemented in former colonies around the world. But by saying that the law is not implemented doesn't mean that the law doesn't have an effect. And really what it does is gives a tacit approval for discrimination based on sexual orientation. So it suggests that the state, that because same-sex relations are outlawed because of this language of vices against nature, it has effects in terms of discrimination within Angola. And certainly the main group within Angola, which is called IRIS, have regularly complained about discrimination in terms of access to health and access to education services in Angola. And a more recently established feminist group has also spoken about the problems of violence and including domestic violence in Angola.
Are there members, different segments of the community that are more affected than others? I know that in some countries, because it's more visible if you're trans or that the trans people are more targeted. Is there this similar pattern in Angola? What's it like, do you know?
Certainly, it seems clear that the more visible one is, and you mentioned trans people, is that the more discrimination that you might face. But what the organizations there have also stressed is that your social status is very important. So the degree to which you are subject to discrimination is directly related to your class status and your relative privilege. So basically, poorer people bear the brunt of discrimination and also struggle most to have access to services. So in Angola, as in many other countries, a lot depends on your social status, your family name, the type of work that you do, whether you're working or not. And clearly people living in rural areas are most marginalized and would find life much more difficult than those living a middle-class life in urban centers.
So what's behind that? Are there some religious issue? Is it societal, just the background in terms of social class, as you were saying, or is there other things that has an impact?
Well, Angola remains a deeply conservative and very religious society. The Catholic Church has a very strong influence, although it's interesting to note that the Catholic Church didn't weigh in this discussion around the decriminalization of same-sex relations. They discreetly withdrew from the public debate, which is in fact in accordance with the official stance of the Catholic Church, which is not always adhered to, but that they're not in support of criminal penalties for same-sex relations. It's also interesting to note that there wasn't much debate in Parliament about this issue. It went through relatively smoothly, and there wasn't much public debate around decriminalization. So while the real issue in the reform of the penal code was around abortion, not around same-sex relations. And it was the abortion issue that delayed the implementation of the penal code by almost a year, because once Parliament approved it, it went to the President for signature, but there were delays in terms of this unresolved issue around abortion. And that was what brought about the delay.
Speaking from South Africa, that was Graham Reid from Human Rights Watch with us on Joy 94.9.
That was fascinating about the Catholic Church, because so many countries that we have covered where, particularly in these cases of where we get this crossover between church and politics, that they withdrew from this one, or they were more focused on the abortion side of things, I guess.
Yeah, I was actually surprised when he pointed out that the official line from the Catholic Church is not to have penalties. No, you're still a sinner.
Well, isn't that the same? Yeah, hate the sin, love the sinner, isn't it?
Yeah. But yeah, it's not surprising that abortion was actually the main issue for them, for the Catholic Church, rather than the legalising of same-sex.
We have covered this before, but the fact that the laws were not implemented, I wonder if that also had a part in this going through quite, the numbers in the end that voted for this change to decriminalise homosexuality, it was completely dominant. I wonder if the fact that, it's kind of been there on the books, nobody's enforcing it, did that make it easier to, as much as having them there is a deterrent, having them there is a tool a weapon that people can use if they want to.
Well, as Graham says, it feeds into that discrimination, even if you don't act on them or don't have any cases of offences brought against these laws. It does actually discriminate against the people in Angola. But if that's the case, why have the other countries still left them? I mean, I'm thinking of Singapore. Why have they kept it and they don't do anything about getting rid of it?
Oh, Singapore, that's one that's always puzzled me. I don't know. Maybe it's also about desire for change. So here you've had people who have been actively pushing over many, many years, not willing to let go. There have been bigger changes that this has been wrapped up into.
Yeah, I was just going to say that obviously this is far more than just having the legalising the same-sex relationships. It's obviously covered a far greater gambit than that.
And possibly having much far greater reach, because coming up we'll find out how this change in Angola might actually influence other countries throughout Africa. You're listening to Worldwide Wave on Joy 94.9.
Our diverse communities have one home. Joy.
Dear Ditch, hello, this is Rosie Fagan speaking to you all the way from Belfast in Northern Ireland on Worldwide Wave.
It's interesting actually, the visibility of the number of LGBT storylines that are coming through, the visibility. We've just had Melbourne Queer Film Festival on with their Together program. There just seems to be more nuanced stories coming through. It's not just the whole coming out thing. They're much deeper, broader, all sorts of things. There was the one that's just about to come out mainstream called Supernova, which is about a gay couple and one's going downhill with dementia and their story. So really getting these very different stories. Perhaps you've seen something, either MQFF or online, one of the streaming services. Let us know what's your fave. What stories in our LGBT community should we be looking out for?
And they've certainly improved from my first experience, which was, I'm sure, John Inman in Are You Being Served? That's not a very good...
Are you free?
Yes.
No, I'm glad we moved on from that.
It took many community forums, 3 parliamentary votes and a presidential veto before the southern African country of Angola was able to decriminalise homosexuality. The final vote passed as 186 to 3, which is an impressive margin for an impressive change, especially given it's in Africa. Given that we're often only hear negative stories of the LGBTI community in Africa, this was a astounding result. Graham Reid is the director of the LGBT rights program for the global advocacy organisation Human Rights Watch. We asked Graham what the main drivers behind the decriminalisation of same-sex relations in Angola were.
What was the main driver behind the change to decriminalise same-sex relationships?
The process in Angola was really about the reform of the penal code. So it was not in response to civil society pressure necessarily. It is the case that IRIS organization had been established some years before and was able to raise awareness around LGBT issues. It was established in 2013 and achieved legal status in 2018, which was described at the time by IRIS Angola as a historic moment, and that enabled them to fight for LGBT rights in Angola. But really what this was about a process of legal reform and bringing the Angolan penal code up to date. And, as I said, the original penal code dated from 1886, so it was high time to do so. So it's unlike other cases, such as in Botswana, where there was a challenge through the courts to the sodomy laws there. And that was a successful challenge in Botswana.
So you mentioned Botswana. How can this change in penal legislation in Angola influence the rest of the neighbouring countries?
Well, I would like to say a little bit more about Botswana, because I think the judgment there was very important and very interesting. The Botswana High Court, in declaring that the sodomy laws there were unconstitutional, the court said that the sodomy laws violated privacy, liberty, and dignity, that they were discriminatory, and that they served no public interest. And furthermore, they said that sodomy laws belong in the museums or archives. So that was a very significant judgment in Botswana. I think it's important to see Angola in the context of other former Portuguese colonies in terms of Lusophone countries within Africa. And there we've seen decriminalization taking place in Mozambique, for example, which took place in 2015. Again, that was through a process of penal code reform where the vices against nature provision was dropped. But Mozambique was also interesting because even before the provision was formally dropped, the Minister of Justice had said that the law applies to vices against nature and homosexuality is not unnatural, and so therefore the law doesn't apply. So in that way, kind of sidestepped the provision of the law and effectively decriminalized even before the penal code reforms took place. But strangely, the main organization in Mozambique, Lambda, has been unable to register. So it operates freely, but not legally. And that's been an ongoing difficulty for that organization. I'd also just mention Cape Verde, which decriminalized in 2004. And Cape Verde is interesting because Cape Verde is a member of the United Nations LGBTI core group, which is a group, a New York-based group that seeks to promote LGBTI rights within the UN system. So there we see a former Portuguese colony that has not only decriminalized, but is playing an active role on the international stage to ensure that people are protected on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity.
So could this decriminalization, and I mean, this seems that most of the former Portuguese colonies have made this change, could that influence the non-former Portuguese, the other country that had been colonized by other?
I certainly think we're seeing a trend towards decriminalization. Aside from Botswana, in recent years, both Seychelles in 2016 and Lesotho in 2012 have decriminalized. And there have been significant regional developments. For example, the African Commission on Human and People's Rights passed an important resolution that condemned violence based on sexual orientation and gender identity, and went further to call on the perpetrators to be brought to justice. And we've seen over the last decades the growth of a very strong and vocal LGBTI rights movement throughout sub-Saharan Africa. And, that has been a real driving force in terms of raising awareness of this issue. Of course, we also get pushback so that a number of political leaders still see that they can get political capital out of taking a very strong anti-LGBT stance. And we see that in various countries, like in Angola, for instance, in Nigeria, and Cameroon, and Zimbabwe, to give you a few examples, where these are often used for political reasons. There's a very strong anti-LGBT stance. But in some ways, that strong and vocal opposition is also a measure of the success of the movement as it's emerged and become much more visible and vocal over the years.
From Human Rights Watch, their Director of LGBT Rights Program, Graham Reid, with us on Joy 94.9, bringing some heartening news about about Africa and in particular Angola. The ripple effect. So there's definitely a change going on, at least in Southern Africa. There've been, and it started with South Africa itself, but there've just been other countries. And interesting, the former Portuguese colonies, it doesn't seem to be as much of a challenge as the former English ones. Paul, I'm pointing to you.
Well, they like to hang on to their traditions, maybe. Angola did hang on to their penal code since 1886, so they haven't moved fast. They haven't moved fast.
It does. A few weeks back, we did speak to the Human Dignity Trust, which is a group of English lawyers who help countries change those bad English laws. Mm-hmm. I haven't heard of the equivalent of that in sort of Portuguese countries. But interestingly, it's a really good podcast, joy.org.au/worldwidewave. The changes so with the good comes the bad. We've still got, Uganda, horrible things happening. Zimbabwe, the LGBT community, particularly gay men, used as political pawns every time there's an election coming along.
Burundi.
Kenya, there's no shortage of countries, but I don't know, it just feels like there's a little bit of a movement whereby changes.
And I do wonder with whether the legal systems are moving, even if the political systems aren't, because that example he gave with Botswana is the court saying, no, throw this out. It's out of date. It doesn't serve any purpose. Actually, I think what he said, it should be in the museum.
In the museum, absolutely, yeah. We've got some more coming up on Joy 94.9. We discover what this law change means to the daily lives of Angola's LGBT community. This is Worldwide Wave.
Turn us on and we'll turn it out. Joy.
It's William calling from Wee Wee Blogs, and you are listening to Worldwide Wave on Joy 94.9. Let's do this!
It's the show that takes you around the globe, one queer story at a time. Worldwide Wave. Now, a special hello to everyone listening to us on podcast. You can subscribe to receive our podcast automatically either at joy.org.au/worldwidewave or on iTunes or whatever your favourite podcast platform happens to be, and don't forget to leave a review.
And of course, Kim is one of the fabulous LGBT artists that we play here on Joy. We play more LGBT artists than any other radio station in Australia, guaranteed, which is why you need to embrace Joy, because we embrace our community. And that, we gave you the heads up last week, that's the Radiothon theme for this year. It's coming up very, very quickly, the 14th to the 23rd of April. Embrace Joy. It's Joy's big annual fundraiser and membership drive.
And I found out today, which I didn't know, that it costs $6,000 just for our show. Just for our hour. For the hour, it costs $6,000 to get a show out
across the year. And we're all volunteers, so none of that comes to us. It's just it's the machinery that sits here in front of us. It's the license that keeps us going. It's all the costs of putting together a station. And even the fundraiser is only a part of the way we keep the station on air. But it's a really, really important part. We can't do it without our members. So we're giving you the heads up because we're going to be coming to you in a couple of weeks' time and saying, hey, get on board, become a member, drop a donation, be a part of the Joy family. I think we should, shall we set ourselves a target for our hour?
Yeah, I think.
I don't think we'll make $6,000.
No,
That's
I
not
think
fair.
we need to fund at least part of that hour.
Absolutely. We need to pull our weight. You're going to pull it with us. Let's say, what do you reckon? $1,000?
That sounds reasonable.
I think we can do $1,000 in an hour. That's our target. We're putting you on notice. We'll be coming back to you to get on board with us this radiothon, joy.org.au, and you can become a member of and part of all the fun here at Joy.
Yeah, we can become
Australia's only LGBTI radio station.
and become a member or donate or do both.
Excellent. That's Radiothon here on Joy.
Now getting back to Angola. So Angola has been on a steady pathway to change. Constitutional changes in 1992 did not make any mention of LGBT people, but a later change in 2010 made general provision about human rights, equality, tolerance for all citizens. Discrimination based on sexual orientation was banned in 2015, and the latest changes just this past February have decriminalised homosexuality. The process may be slow, but at least it's moving in the right direction. Graham Reid has been watching the progress in Angola with interest as part of his role as Director of LGBT Programs for Human Rights Watch. We asked Graham what difference this change has made to the daily lives of LGBTI people in Angola.
And looking at people's lives, LGBTIQ people's lives in Angola, what do you think, and maybe based on what happened in other countries, what is going to be the main impact on their lives? Because you said that law might not have been used before, but there was some, obviously it was used, it was there in the background. So how can you see now that lives might change because of that?
Well, just yesterday I spoke to the leader of a women's-focused feminist organization dealing mostly with the issues facing lesbians, bisexual, transgender and queer women. And what she said is that she feels that the law will assist in getting better access to health, education and employment, that the law will increase protection and also in the long term help to reduce stigma and discrimination. But that what was still needed is a strong education, particularly of state officials and police, in order to better deal with LGBTI people in Angola. So the sense is that the law is a very good starting point, but there's still a long way to go in terms of changing social attitudes and official attitudes towards people based on sexual orientation and gender identity.
And from your knowledge of this part of Africa and what do you think we need? What else do we need for the societal attitude and stigma to start shifting?
I think it's very important that organizations who are working in particular countries take the lead in any initiatives in order to bring about change. We obviously work as Human Rights Watch in an international context, but we always take our advice from organizations who are working within particular countries because they know best the political situation, they know their priorities and what their particular issues are. And so my first point would be that organizations, local organizations should take the lead, and it very much depends on the context as to what the main issues are that should be tackled. For example, in some countries, like for instance in Cameroon, it's about bringing about an end to arrests based on sexual orientation or gender identity. In other countries such as Kenya, there's a move towards decriminalization. There's been cases going through the courts for a long time. In other countries, it's about getting registration of organizations just so that they can start doing the work of raising awareness and changing social attitudes. I'm speaking to you from South Africa. I am South African. And, South Africa made a dramatic change when the first post-apartheid constitution was adopted, and that included an express provision protecting against discrimination based on sexual orientation, and discrimination based on gender identity is also forbidden in South Africa. So we've seen tremendous change in some parts of the continent and slower changes in other parts of the continent, but it's an uneven development. I would say that the overall trend is definitely towards a more open and inclusive societies in relation to sexual orientation and gender identity.
Graham Reid, Director of the LGBT Rights Program at Human Rights Watch. Thank you very much for talking to us at World Wide Wave.
Thank you very much.
And some great tips, and we have heard this before too about the local, it's got to be the local organisations driving it. And it's not just, I think it's more than them just knowing their local situation. It's that personal voice. It's a local person saying, this law impacts me in this way. That's powerful.
It's having that local knowledge, isn't it? There's an English saying about right horses for the right courses. If you've got to have the local knowledge about the country, about the political system, about where they are, and we also get back to, you don't want people going in and saying this is what you got to do.
That's right.
It just puts people off.
That's right. It actually gives ammunition to the people who are, you know, on the other side saying, oh, it's the whole thing that's un-African.
It's a Western problem.
It's a Western thing. Yeah. Which issue to tackle though? That is the one thing I was thinking as he was saying that is that another a tool used by opponents of change or progress for LGBT rights is, it's the thin end of the wedge. You know, if we decriminalise homosexuality, then there'll be gay marriage.
They'll be married. They'll want to have children, and yes.
They always go straight to it's either the kids or the marriage. So yes, I like that approach of picking the issue that is most pertinent to your community at that point in time.
And he makes a perfect point that in some countries, the first thing you want to be able to do is actually set up an organisation and get it registered.
Who can then advocate?
Who can, because they haven't even got to that point yet.
Yeah.
There's no point trying to go in and say, well, we want equal rights when you haven't actually got a voice in that country.
Just one more that I thought of too, Namibia, because they had their first Pride Parade there about 2 or 3 years ago. In that time, in that space of 3 years, the police chief there wants to now do diversity training with his police force. So to take that, to try and make change at the grassroots level of the police force. So that's the kind of change that can really make a big difference.
Want to hear more? Find out about LGBT life in over 100 countries. Download free podcasts of this show. Subscribe to iTunes or follow us on Twitter. Visit joy.org.au/worldwidewave.
Hi, this is Max from Amnesty International speaking from Ukraine on the World Wide Wave.
Receive LGBT news from around the world throughout the week. Like World Wide Wave on Facebook now.
A huge thank you to our friends at Human Rights Watch. Graham Reid is the Director of LGBT Programs for Human Rights Watch, and they work right across the spectrum of issues all around the world. You can find out what they're doing at hrw.org.
We would also like to thank everyone that interacted with us on Facebook. So Aldi, Daniel, Selena, Yangfar, and there's a heap more. Now, we're very easy to find on Facebook. I mean, you can go for World Wide Wave, but also W3Joy on Facebook.
And we have a really fabulous behind-the-scene team helping us out here. Our podcaster, Peter, gets our podcasts out each and every week. You can find them at joy.org.au/worldwidewave or your favourite podcast platform. And, of course, our social media master, Dean, who used to be with us in the studio, now lives overseas, but he still keeps up with our social media. Excellent effort.
Thanks for listening to another podcast from World Wide Wave, the show that takes you around the globe one country at a time.
Worldwide Wave is the international news and current affairs show on Australia's LGBT radio station Joy 94.9. You can listen live every Tuesday night from 7 p.m. Eastern Australian Time on 94.9 FM in Melbourne and online at joy.org.au. You'll find all our podcasts at joy.org.au/worldwidewave or follow us on Facebook for the latest international LGBT news. Search W3Joy on Facebook now.
Thanks for listening to another Joy podcast brought to you by Australia's LGBTQIA+ community media organisation, Joy. Help us keep Joy on air. Head to joy.org.au. Joy, a diverse sound for a diverse community.